Hello and welcome to our podcast on Polysyndeton and Asyndeton. Some very confusing words for a relatively simple concept, but we wanted to give you guys some information on that. So let's go ahead and see what we're talking about. So what are both of these things? Basically, they are different ways to write items in a series. So let's go back to how we normally write things in a series. So our example sentence at the bottom. He went to the store to buy bread, milk, cheese, and bagels. And so when we have more than two items in a series, we use commas to separate them, and then we use a comma and then an and before that last item. Now there's always debate about whether you need that last comma before the and then your last item. Our point of view is that you should always use that because at the very least you are avoiding any potential confusion. But regardless, this is the typical way that we write items in a series. We separate them with commas, and then we have a comma and then an and before that last item. But polysyndeton and asyndeton are two different ways to write items in a series in a different fashion. So first off, polysyndeton. Polysyndeton is the overuse of conjunctions between those items in a series. So if we rewrote our example sentence using polysyndeton, rather than having commas between most of the items and then the and before the last one, it becomes, he went to the store to buy bread and milk and cheese and bagels. And that is okay. That is grammatically okay. That is stylistically okay. And that is polysyndeton, the overuse of conjunctions when connecting items in a series. Some other examples. He ran and jumped and laughed for joy. You wouldn't believe how many exams I've got. I've got math and English and history and choir and biology. And so with any of these rhetorical choices that we might make as writers, we need to consider the effect. Since it is grammatically legal to do this, and you can go ahead and use conjunctions over and over again to connect things in a series, the next thing we have to consider is what is the effect that we create when we use polysyndeton? And is that the effect we want to create as the writer in our rhetorical triangle? So the effect is it slows the pace of the sentence. Each item gets more attention drawn to it because when you separate with just a comma, it's a minute pause and you just kind of list the things in that series. But when you use a conjunction, you're forced to slow down and really examine each element that is being listed in that series. Additionally, it's going to increase the impact of each element. Since more attention is drawn to it, each element is going to stand out a little bit more. And so if that's what you're after, then polysyndeton, the overuse of conjunctions, is a great way to go. Here's some more examples from famous texts created by real authors. From Maya Angelou, she wrote, "Let the white folds have their money and power and segregation and sarcasm and big houses and schools and lawns like carpets and books and mostly, let them have their whiteness." So clearly a comment on racial issues, and she's using the polysyndeton to separate all of the different elements that white America may be using against people of color. And so by using that, it draws attention to all of the different elements that she is examining. Ernest Hemingway, "And it was dark, and there was water standing in the street, and no lights and windows broke, and boats all up in the town, and trees blown down, and everything all blown, and I got a skiff and went out and found my boat where." So again, another example of polysyndeton. Now the other term of our podcast is asyndeton, and this is the idea of an underuse of conjunctions with items in a series. So going back to our example sentence, if we use asyndeton to join them, we have something like this. He went to the store to buy bread, milk, cheese, bagels. So rather than putting an and before bagels, we just connected them all with commas. We did not use any conjunctions. Again, we have to think about the effect of this. And unlike polysyndeton, which is going to slow down the pace of a sentence, asyndeton is going to speed up the pace because we don't have to pause for any conjunctions in between. This is just going to rapidly move us throughout that sentence. And usually when we use asyndeton, we get special attention drawn to the last item. And therefore that last item is of especially strong impact. And I'm not exactly sure why this is, since they're all evenly distributed by the comma, but there's something about rushing that pace and then getting to that last one. It's like you're rushing so you can get to the last item. And then therefore, because it's last, it gets a little bit more attention. So if you would like to speed the pace, if you like to draw attention to that last item, then asyndeton, what you should be trying to use. So here's some examples. He was a bag of bones, a floppy doll, a broken stick, a maniac. From John F. Kennedy, we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. So again, he's saying that we shall do many things: pay, bear, meet, support, and oppose. But rather than separating them with conjunctions, which would be polysyndeton, rather than joining them in the usual manner, which is commas and then an and before the last one, he chose to use asyndeton. So it's a little bit more rapid pace and then a focus on the last one. So that's about it in terms of what polysyndeton and asyndeton are and their effects on our writing. So as always, we can notice it from the reader's perspective. We can feel the effects of these when we're reading, and we should notice them when writers are using them in their texts and we are reading. But then as we flip that around and become writers, we can consider using more of these throughout our writing when we are after that certain effect. So if we want to slow things down, we might consider polysyndeton. If we would like to speed the pace of a list, then we might use asyndeton. Thanks so much for listening. As always, if you have any questions, please bring those into class. We'll get those answered for you. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.